Hello and welcome to the Water Cooler, episode number 2. Coming at you not live, but pre-recorded because I can't figure out how to do it.
I don't think they needed to know that, but yeah, no, that's true. But
No, they'll figure it out.
Transparency is key.
Yeah,
I
dude.
suppose that's true. That's fair.
I'm not trying to create any false social media narratives to make it seem like we've got things more together than we do.
We're figuring it out. We're learning on the fly.
This is true. So, welcome back. Thanks for coming to check us out again. Today's on the docket, we got some talk about video games, so that'll be interesting. But first, to sort of kick us off, we got 2 different bell ringers to get us moving and grooving a little bit here. Josh, you want to go first? Or you want mine to go first?
I was gonna reference something. I thought I was gonna start off by referencing something from our last recording, but I forget what it was. So I'll go ahead and jump in.
All right.
So yeah, so I was kind of thinking, I was thinking about, I was on my commute on my way to work sometime this week, and it occurred to me, like, there was this random song that started playing, and I was like, wow, this is one of those songs that, like, you'd hear at a bar or just out at a restaurant, and it's like a pretty uppity song, but the meaning is like totally like utter devastation. You're timing me out. What's the timeout?
I don't think that means what you think it means.
What'd I say?
Said uppity.
Well, I just mean like mood-wise.
Upbeat.
Okay, whatever. Fine. Well, uppity, cheerful, whatever. It's fine. I'll abandon it. Thank you for calling me out. So I guess my question is, like, do you have any, like, subgenres or moods, like, within music? Because mine is those types of songs. Like, do you guys remember, we talked about this a long time ago, Prayer in C. Have you guys ever heard that song?
The title sounds familiar. I don't know if I could, like, name it offhand,
Yeah.
but I do remember discussing it, I feel.
That's just a song that sticks out to me, and it has an electronic sort of remix. I could send it to you guys to ring a bell. We talked about it, it was like 2017 or so. But anyways, you can answer the question.
Yeah, we talked about it 5 years ago. You guys don't remember that?
I remember the conversation because I asked Eli directly about it.
I
Yeah.
probably didn't read it.
Did it have, like, a red album cover, I feel?
Yes.
I
it's
do
coming in.
I remember
It's a
that.
Robin Schultz radio edit.
Yep. No, I remember exactly the song you're talking about then.
Yeah, Paul.
Yes, nope, this is the exact song. I do remember this song.
Yeah.
To answer the question, my music listening is incredibly dependent on the context I'm in, which is like, it's almost to a fault. My wife often laughs at me and says, like, I'm like curating a soundtrack for whatever I'm doing. So like if it's summertime and I'm like in the country, I put on country music. If it's like winter and I'm in town, I play jazz, rap music for the gym, that sort of stuff. So I think my subgenre is really dependent on what I like to do and what I'm doing in that moment.
Yeah.
And when it's not curated to that, it bothers me. Like, for example, Apple Music like makes playlists, and like they'll like pre-make the playlist for you. They have a subsection called like cooking and dining or something like that, and it's like they curate playlists for like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and like the cooking process. And I was looking through one the other day, and they had one for dessert, and I was like, all right, this could be cool. Let's see what's going on here. But all the songs were like very sexual, and I didn't like how that like was not meshing with what I picture like having a dinner party over.
Food, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, this is like kind of strange. I don't really either. People at Apple have a very different idea of what happens at the end of a dinner party, or like I just am not. I'm not with the times. But that was an example of like where something's not in sync with where I think it ought to be. It throws me off, and I don't really enjoy music in that space. So I would say mine's like context specific.
Gotcha. Really quick, I looked up what the word uppity meant. First time I ever learned that, so thank you. I learned something new today.
I was going to
no
slide, but Paul came at the time. I was like, all right, well, I mean, we can make it a learning moment.
We'll educate the masses. I think so. Because you had mentioned this bell ringer earlier this week, and I've been trying to wrap my head around it. And
No, you asked for it today.
But you had mentioned it earlier, and I like had been trying to wrap my head around it. And I think I just experience music extremely differently than you do. I feel like you're very much like a, for lack of a better word, vibe type person, you know? And I do very much structured based upon, I guess my vibe follows the genre, not the song specifically. So like the way I structure everything is I have like 8 playlists that are all divvied by genre.
Yeah.
So like punk music, rap music, jazz, crooner stuff, like, and then I have one large playlist that has all my favorite songs from all those genres in it. And I kind of just rotate through those depending on what I'm in the mood of listening to. But I think I follow suit with Eli where like my kind of go-to is generally like just my punk playlist, I guess, but I try to listen to whatever it is that's kind of fitting the vibe of what I'm doing that day too. So like when I was driving to Nashville the other weekend, like I was jamming out to some country the whole time.
Yeah. I gotcha. I mean, I guess this is just sort of a niche thing that I just sent you guys a sample playlist, and like Prayer and Sea's there. After the Disco by Broken Bells is in there. Nightlife Blues is in there by North Downs, and Paul, CBB to Be Sad I added there too because I think it fits into what I'm describing. CBB to Be Sad by Ider, I-D-E-R, all caps, is one of the most devastating songs I've ever heard, but if you play the first 15 minutes of that, it sounds like an upbeat indie record. But like the first lyric is literally I hate myself, and it goes on and it's just like horrible, just anyways. Jam out, Paul. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just kind of, I think, one of the things I'd like to do, or I think it would be cool for us to do, is to just navigate music and how we all experience it differently and whatnot. So that might be down the pipeline.
I feel like that's, yeah, no, I agree. I feel like that definitely warrants its own.
Oh, for sure. Easy
episode. I mean, music's kind of, Elisha and I used to host a radio show.
And manage a radio station, not to undersell our involvement in the
well, you managed. I was there.
You were on the board, though.
Yeah, I fixed the problems that never came up.
I also once performed live in a musical group in law school. I was in a parody rap group, so not to toot my own horn about...
Is it still active?
No,
Are you guys still active? Okay.
We are not still active.
They're on hiatus.
I do keep in touch with both of them. They're very dear friends of mine from law school. But no, we do not record anymore. It turns out once you're out of law school, law-themed parody raps are not finding a general audience outside of that context. So, but anyway, safe to say, I still love music. I do love music, but I do think it deserves its own episode for sure. But it's a good bell ringer. So mine is kind of... timely is not really the word. It's kind of morbid too, so I'm sorry about that. But over the past week, there have been like several notable deaths in the news. Like Tina Turner passed earlier this week, and then last week Jim Brown died, and before him, or actually on the same day, this is more niche to my interest, but Tim Keller, who's like a pastor and writer in New York, he wrote like 20 books over the past decade or so about like faith and public life and sort of culture. He passed away as well. So a lot of like notable people died. And you could read obituaries for Keller. They had some in the Atlantic. Jim Brown, I'm sure and Tina Turner, you're going to see obituaries for them pretty much everywhere. But I guess my question would be to the group, what like celebrity or notable person's death like was the most impactful to you, like on a personal level? Because I think sometimes when notable people die, everyone feels like they have to say something. But,
Sure.
Like having a specific relationship to like a notable person when they die, it's a different experience. So I guess like just as a general ask, like, is there anyone in particular that springs to mind for you two in that context?
Shouts to you, Eli, first for kind of putting this out there. I don't know if you prepped us for this. I missed
didn't.
it. So,
I did
okay,
not.
Good. I appreciate it coming sort of naturally. That's all I wanted to say. Paul, you can go first if you want.
Oh, well, I don't know. The first thing that came to my mind is screaming. I'm sure it's ringing in Joshua's head too, especially given his T-shirt.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, Chester Bennington. I think it's kind of interesting. we're all kind of, I was gonna say like on the verge of adulthood, but we're all adults in different stages of adulthood. But you know what they say, like the sands of time keep marching on, and it's just weird. It was weird when Chester passed. The context of his death for one, but also just like it was kind of the first loss of a major childhood formative person for me, and somebody that, you know, like a major musician in my head and my heart, who helped to form kind of my music taste in one of the first bands, you know, Chester Bennington being the lead vocalist of Linkin Park. And it was just kind of like a bomb dropped when I found out that he passed. And I don't know, it just, you know, it was kind of like the first time that like a major, you know, like I think about like when Michael Jackson died, right? Like that, like I was like, oh wow, like that's big, right? Like that's a big thing. But it was the first time that kind of somebody that I really looked up to on a personal level that was a celebrity that passed away for me. So I'd say that kind of struck a bell.
Yeah.
Especially with it being somebody who was younger, you know. And I think, I'm sure somebody will talk about this too, but even though like I wasn't a big basketball fan during Kobe's prime years, you know, when he passed too, like that was like, it was like, whoa, like this younger gentleman who had still a lot obviously going for him. And I think everybody was kind of excited to see where Kobe was going to go, you know, fresh out of retirement. And he was making all these moves and everything, and kind of to see what he was going to do in his later years. That too, it was like very much both of those for me were like people who were taken too early, and still had a lot to give in their own artful manners to the world. And it was, you know, shocking to kind of note that they're just gone, you know, not that their impact's gone, but to think to the fact that there is no more new creation coming from either of those two. Two people who, you know, like I said, even though I wasn't a huge basketball fan during like Kobe's prime years, just following him in his life in relationships as he was getting near retirement and then through retirement, I was really looking forward to seeing kind of what he was going to be doing. And like, I feel like I remember very vividly one of my friends texted me, and it was, you know, it was kind of in the beginning of lockdown, right? And this friend and I we text each other things that are totally off the wall to try and scare each other. He was in pharmacy school with me, and we both went on to do pharmacy residencies. And like, for example, I texted him on residency match day, or like the day before, that they were canceling residency for the next year because of COVID, like just to catch him off guard. And then like 2 weeks later, I get this text, hey, did you see Kobe died? And I was like, oh, like, haha, very funny. And then like, I remember pulling out my phone and being like, oh shoot, like Kobe's dead.
Yeah, I'm going to answer this in two parts. First, I think in terms of like in the moment impact upon learning the news, Kobe, I remember the moment I learned about Kobe and the panic that I followed and was joining in on Twitter. I remember that. And you know, that Kobe was, for me, I've been a basketball fan my whole life. Kobe was the first jersey I owned. It was the first player I was introduced to. So Kobe was really impactful to me, and really a lot of my friends that I grew up with. I mean, that really put things into perspective for us. That was a childhood idol. Not like I personally saw myself in Kobe or had that type of relationship, but like he was, you know, he was the guy. You grew up with him. He was sort of a part of a pseudo basketball family, if you will. And so that was really impactful. But my answer, I think, is Chester, actually. Chester Bennington from Linkin Park. And I think the reason for that is to just sort of expound, and I'll answer more personally too. I grew up with, I mean, we all grew up with Linkin Park, right? But I whenever I found them, I think I first started listening to them. I was in like second or third grade, and it was my first introduction. I know they're not pure metal, but it was my first introduction to that, like that intense of like a genre of music. And I remember just listening to a lot of those songs for the first time. It was Meteora at the time, actually, who they just celebrated the 20th anniversary for Meteora, and I was just struck by one, the intensity, but just the lyrics. It was the first time I was ever sort of I ever experienced that kind of language that can be put to pain and to suffering, and to follow through with Linkin Park through that, and Chester obviously being the face, the delivery, the voice of those meanings. It was, and it still is, and I think a lot of fans, whenever Meteora, they celebrated this a month or so ago, a lot of fans feel the same way that I do, which is that, he was the voice for a lot and provided a lot of language to suffering, from depression, from anxiety. And a lot of people have this sort of fear that, if Chester, who was sort of, the spearhead, for at least speaking for myself, the spearhead for, this communication of suffering and trying to push through and power through and to heal, if he suffered from it to the point where he passes, right? Like, what does that mean for us? And I think a lot of fans feel that way. I'm not saying that that's how I feel, but I think that is sort of the pull and the meaning that I think of when I think of his death. And, obviously, I'm thinking about his family and everything still, but just personally, that was really impactful, and it still is impactful. And that's why, I totally unplanned that I wore this merch. I didn't know you were going to ask that.
Yeah, that was. I'm sorry for kind of springing this on everyone.
No, I like it. It's good, and I like talking about it too. Just again, that personal sort of connection, and how, more importantly, what Paul was kind of talking about, how their lives can carry on with these messages and things, and how we can continue to celebrate them, right?
Yeah. I guess I have to answer now. I guess to speak to Kobe, because that was definitely one that sprang to my mind. I was living in Virginia at the time, and I remember just like you see on Twitter first, or like TMZ, I think, had sprung it first. They were like, he died in a helicopter crash, and people were going back and forth like, it's fake, it's not fake, it's real, it's not real. And sort of, there was like that hour or two where people were trying to sort out what actually had happened, and then you heard that it was real. And then not only that it was him, it was his daughter, and then the other people on the helicopter as well. I was, just struck. I don't think I even necessarily thought I was that sad in the moment. But my wife was like, I'm sorry. And just hearing someone else say that was like really helping it sink in. And my dad also, I think, sent me a message like, I'm sorry about this. Because me and my dad used to argue all the time about Kobe Bryant. I was not a lifelong basketball fan. I got into basketball just playing pickup in college. So I got into the game like very late. And at that point, Kobe was kind of diminished in skills. But as both of you know, I kind of have a contrarian streak in me. So like, as someone who's like was established and was like the guy and had like a very specific aura about him, I always loved and admired Kobe Bryant. And so he's always going to be like my favorite player in some sense, because he is the guy that made me like basketball. And so that's like a sort of relationship with that figure that I don't know anyone can ever replicate. Even though if I think now, like, so-and-so is better at basketball than Kobe, or I like watching this person play more than I like watching Kobe. Thinking of, like, the last game he ever played where he scored 60 points. I mean, like, that was one of the coolest sporting experiences I've ever had in my life. And, yeah, like, my dad, who we would argue back and forth all the time about how good Kobe was, he sent me a message, was like, I know I used to, like, poke at you, but I'm sorry about this. And sort of that sinking in was very sad, because it was, like we said, so halting and so immediate. So that one's up there. And the only other one that I can think of off the top of my head is also an athlete. It's Muhammad Ali. I loved Muhammad Ali when I was a kid. I obviously was not old enough to like watch him fight or anything, but I had a poster in my room. I really just admired him and his stance on racial and social issues, and being a man that stands on principle. And I mean, he was so good at what he did. Like I used to spar in Taekwondo. I wanted to spar in Taekwondo like Muhammad Ali would box. Like I just love Muhammad Ali, and so his death was obviously a lot less surprising because he was old, and boxers don't tend to age very well in general by the nature of their profession. But just when he passed, and sort of like every athlete on the planet was kind of like had to pay homage. It was just shocked because it almost was like this guy was invincible in some sense. You know what I mean? And so Muhammad Ali was just one where I was like, he was just the greatest. I mean, you can't say anything else besides that. So Muhammad Ali was always high on that in terms of things that impacted me greatly in that sense. So I would say Kobe and Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I was just
gonna
say like, talking about Muhammad Ali, it's like you mentioning the fact that like you, obviously, even when you were younger and a bigger, not bigger, but like a big fan of his, it was obviously out of his prime time, right? And I think that's another aspect that really upsets me about Chester specifically, is that I never got to see him perform live. Especially because I was supposed to see him perform live. It was freshman year of college. I was supposed to see Linkin Park perform with Rise Against, was my other favorite band growing up, and Chester had, I think Chester broke his ankle or something during a previous performance, and they had to cancel the show in Pittsburgh. And I remember at the time it being like, well, like obviously this stinks, but I'll catch them the next time that they come through, and they never did. Linkin Park at that point was not fading down by any stretch of the imagination, but not touring like they used to or anything like that. And I was like, well, I had seen the Rolling Stones. I was like, well, I've seen the Rolling Stones perform. Like, I'll catch Linkin Park when I catch Linkin Park. And then I just remember being really additionally upset when he had passed, because it's like, well, I will never see Chester Bennington perform live.
Yeah. And, it would feel irresponsible for me personally if we didn't acknowledge, like, Chester died by suicide. And so just for the folks who don't know. And so anyways, just to kind of say that.
To build on it, and this is kind of tangential, but I didn't know if like Chris Cornell was like a big impact on you guys when he passed as well.
Not as big.
Like, and I know that's like tangential, but I know they had a relationship, and I didn't know how big the fandom overlap really was in that sense.
Not as big for me, but it was just it made the whole thing that much more upsetting, knowing that they were friends, and that had driven partially part of that.
Yeah. And again, just to kind of capstone this, if we want to move on from Chester, I one of the things that has come from this is just awareness for suicide in general. And there's a lot of work. I think his wife and his family still have a fundraiser that's likely in his name, and things. So there's a lot of awareness that has come from his work and his art. So just to shout that out. But I know I don't know how much time we want to spend more of this, whatever you guys are comfortable with. But I think it's really, I was just kind of sitting here reflecting on like all of our different experiences with losing a celebrity that we admire. And you know how the internet is, right? And how Twitter is, and there's a lot of apathy that can come from this, from people who are grieving the loss of an idol, or in whatever capacity that they are their idol. And there's a lot of apathy about like, oh, you don't even know this person, why are you worshiping like a billionaire, that sort of stuff, right? And I'm just thinking personally how unfair I feel like that sort of reaction is. Just thinking about like, we're talking about Kobe, right, and Muhammad Ali and Chester and all these different people, and I'm just thinking about how I think I used the word family earlier. Like, it feels like it's not someone we personally know, but it's someone who's touched and impacted our lives, and we absolutely should take the liberty and the freedom to grieve that. Of course, I don't know how.
I think there's, and I think pointing out Twitter specifically as this context is good, because there are people that say things like that, not even to really make the point, but just to like feel smart and like rain on people's parades. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Uh-huh.
And like appear so above it. I think there is such thing as like, and I'm sure we'll have an episode on this at some point, a unhealthy attachment and like literal worship of an individual where you start to
Sure.
paint over their flaws and like replace important things in your life with that person. But that's a very different thing than what we're talking about. And like
Of course.
with Muhammad Ali specifically, for example, I just think of what he like represents to like a lot of people. And I've done more reading about him, and he had flaws. He was a human being, of course, and there were some
Mm-hmm.
aspects of him that were not necessarily admirable. And that this happened with Jim Brown too. And for those who don't know, Jim Brown had a long and troubled history with his treatment of women, including multiple very serious um, episodes of domestic violence. And Jim Brown, more so than say Muhammad Ali, but they can still represent a very specific thing where, like Muhammad Ali was, I think, at one point like the most famous person on the planet, and that was
Mm.
not for no reason. Standing up for specific things and representing at a time where black people were not told to be proud or strong and told to fear themselves or fear other people or reproach from other people. He was like a superhero. I remember when I saw Black Panther, I was like, this is very cool to feel represented this way. And Muhammad Ali was like a real life
Mm.
superhero that like represented black strength and black pride and black joy and unabashedly so. And so for people to be like, you don't really know him, it's like, I don't know if you have to know him to really beam with joy and pride at something like that. Or, for
Yeah.
example, with Chester, if he gives language to very real and deep feelings that people have, sure, you don't know him. I mean, who
Right.
really knows any of these people? But, that matters still. Like, that connection, that's why they have fans. I mean, because they mean something to a bunch of people. So
Yeah.
I tend to share your opinion on that, where it's like there's no need to diss people for feeling strong feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was sad.
It was like I said, it was
No.
kind of morbid. So
On yeah, it was, and I was just sitting here, if we were all tapped out of thoughts. I do appreciate you bringing this up, Eli, and I'm happy we had the chance to just talk about it. Because I don't think, I mean, it's definitely the first time we've talked about this in person, and just again,
Mhm.
just what these figures mean to us.
no, absolutely.
I'm touched by that. I enjoy the emotionality that I'm feeling right now.
Mm. Well, if
Video
we're
games.
video game. Something slightly more light. Yeah, we'll get into something slightly more joyous here.
Wait,
So
hate each other at the end of it.
that's probably also true, but that's kind of the best conversations, honestly. So just to prime today. Today we're talking about video games as like a medium in general. If I have a good grasp on what we're doing here, I might be off base, but I think we're just talking about video games as a medium for doing storytelling work and also what they kind of mean, which is kind of interesting because I think we're all slightly older now. So like, I know video games are no longer like the domain of just teenagers, but I think getting older and having seen at least multiple generations and iterations of games, you get an
Yeah.
interesting-ish perspective. So we're going to start though with MVPs. We're picking our favorite video game protagonist. And sort of pitching it. So, yeah, I guess have at it. Who's going first?
I'm curious who if we're gonna overlap any of us.
There's a decent chance Paul and I do for sure.
Well, yeah, there is a decent chance you and I do, and there's also a decent chance that you and I don't.
I'm thinking if we don't, it's going to be from the same series, but you're going to pick the other guy that I don't actually like from said series.
That sounds
Am I
about
on?
right.
Okay, all right. So I'll go first. My favorite video game protagonist of all time, easily, Arthur Morgan, Red Dead Redemption 2. This game is the last game I played where I was like all in. This game, for reference, it's a Western game. It's like 1890s, I believe. It's like 60 hours long, like if you just play the main story, and there's like a ridiculous and obscene amount of side quests and world building going on. It's Rockstar. It's the same people that make Grand Theft Auto, which is another great game. I love Grand Theft Auto games. But Red Dead Redemption 2, great story. Arthur Morgan is like, I think, the best protagonist in like an American video game that I've ever seen. He's an outlaw. He does a lot of bad stuff. But over the course of the game, they make you feel such a depth of sympathy for this person. And you come to think of him as a very fundamentally decent person who's not been given chances in life. And he's just super, super... He's very grounded and very realistic in a way, but he's very trusting to a point of almost naivete with, like, antagonists in the game. He's somehow simultaneously a criminal with a very deep sense of justice, if that makes sense. And in many ways, he kind of embodies the outlaw character of that we think of when we think of like the Western as a genre, but he also turns it on its head, and it's a fascinating dichotomy in that game and what that game does with the Western genre. I love the game. It's like my favorite thing. I think it's perfect, and he is by far my favorite character out of any video game I've ever played. So I think I know what Paul's going to pick now.
Yeah, so my number one protagonist from any video game is actually a man who used to run with the Vanderlyn gang.
Yep. All right. Yeah.
Also, I would like to say that there probably will be spoilers in this episode.
Oh, good call.
In regards to these games that we're going to be discussing, to properly try and give you a taste of kind of what the storytelling aspect of everything is here. But you know, like, these games are old now, so get wrecked if you haven't played them.
I don't co-sign any of what Paul's saying, by the way, but it's okay.
No spoilers.
I'll talk about it. No, I'm not. Nah, yeah, absolutely not.
Okay, well, whatever. So my number one protagonist is John Marston. So John Marston is the main protagonist so the game Eli is discussing is Red Dead Redemption 2, which is a newer game, but a prequel to the story of that which is told in Red Dead Redemption 1, where Red Dead Redemption 1 follows John Marston in his time that we would later find out happens after the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, which were previously untold. And I think, Red Dead Redemption 1 came out, what year was it?
2011, 2010, I want to say.
Sheesh.
Well, Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't come out till 2018, so that's kind of...
Yeah, they were almost a decade apart, for sure.
That just speaks to the level of detail that Rockstar puts into those things. Those
Red Dead...
behemoths.
Yeah, Red Dead 1 came out in 2010.
Yep.
Jeez. So, during the events of Red Dead 1, they refer to a lot of these events that you end up finally seeing play through in Red Dead Redemption 2. And I remember just at the time playing through Red Dead 1 that I was really encapsulated by this sense of, like, brotherhood. So basically the premise of Red Dead 1 is that you are tasked with basically finding the remaining members of this outlaw gang and essentially capturing them or hunting them down because the government had taken John's wife and child. And the government is telling you essentially that, we will give you back your wife and child as you round up the rest of these men that you used to run with. And you would go and find them, and they would make references to things that had happened that you eventually got to see happen in Red Dead 2. And even before Red Dead 2, I remember being like, wow, they really captured the sense of, this used to be a tight-knit group of people, and now everybody's kind of fallen off or gone their separate ways, and some have really taken to the better side of life, and some have really taken to the outlaw side of life. And for me, playing Red Dead 2, which I think is video game wise the better video game, but storytelling wise just really reinforced everything that I'd felt through playing Red Dead 1. And absolute huge massive spoiler for Red Dead 1. But the end of Red Dead Redemption 1, they basically give you a taste of you spending time with with John's wife and John's child. And then towards the very end of the game, the government double crosses John and kills John at their family ranch. And I just remember like playing through that and just saying like no, like just being like no, like I've same type of deal where it's like a 60-hour game to get through just the story mode, and I'd put all this time in, and it's like, okay, now I get to like see what John's happy life is like as he spends time with his family. And there's just the scene, like I can see it clear as day. The game utilizes a gameplay element called Deadeye, where basically you slow down time, and because he's a cowboy, he can kind of pick off all these people in one quick go. And there's like 20 to 30 army rangers in front of you with the Pinkertons, like the private investigation company. And the game basically makes you feel like that potentially there's a way for you to off all these people and save John's life. And there just isn't. I mean, it's a scripted event, like John will die. But it's just, I remember Rockstar does such a good way, and I think we'll definitely talk about Red Dead 2 more as we talk about video games as a whole and the art of storytelling, but they do such a good way of kind of blurring the line between gameplay elements and the storytelling in video games. And because of the interactivity, video games create this medium of storytelling that is unlike anything else. And I just remember like thinking to myself, like, well, I'll replay it and see if I can't get like 2 more of the guys and see if I can't like get him out of here. And there's no way to do it. And there's just feeling of hopelessness that comes over you, like watching this man who had just been away from his family for however many months or however many years, and he finally is like getting a taste of kind of his relaxing life, and it's just like ripped away from you. And same kind of deal in terms of Arthur Morgan, in terms of John being like a bad guy with a good sense of morals about him, and it just crushed me. It just absolutely crushed me. And playing through Red Dead Redemption 2 and kind of knowing everything that was going to shake out was just like painful for me.
I think just to point out that John is also the only guy, when you play the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2, he's the main playable character, which I guess kind of by definition spoils what happens to Arthur during the story. So you also literally start building this life with John at the end of Red Dead Redemption 2 as well, and so kind of reinforces that depth of world building that Rockstar really went for, which I just am blown away by to this day, honestly.
It's so crazy to me because I can't even sell what John is or who John is, or even Arthur. Like, I can't sell them as a character without having demonstrate the actions and the things that take place to them throughout their story. I just feel like trying to verbalize what has occurred to them is doing both of them just an injustice in terms of the storytelling.
Absolutely.
All right, Josh, tell us about The Last of
Yeah.
Us.
Or
So
A2.
mine is going to be Last of Us, and to be quite clear, we kind of all knew. We've had this argument maybe at least 2 or 3 times before, the 3 of us, and it always comes down to Red Dead versus Last of Us. That I'm the lone wolf here. So I'm not going to spoil The Last of Us because I can't, because the second season is going to be coming out, and they're going to explore the events of The Last of Us Part 2. And so I want to do our audience a service, and I'm not going to talk about the specifics of that game.
Send him the check, HBO.
Yeah, please. Well, Naughty Dog. I want the check from Naughty Dog. It's Max now, right?
Oh yeah, right. I actually
They did
just
that
changed
whole
the app
stupid
today.
thing.
It's Max now. It's
Yeah, you had to
fine.
download a new app, right?
I did have to download the new app. Yeah.
Yeah. So my MVP is Ellie Williams. So I will talk about the events of the first game, not in specifics, but the 2 games together. I can speak loosely. and I'll speak in response to Red Dead too. The Last of Us, in comparison to Red Dead, is not it's not an open world game, right? It's fairly linear. It's an over the shoulder third person, and it's a survival type game as well. And so with that come the natural elements of, there's horror elements in Last of Us, right? That you need to do your best to survive, and the zombies, they don't call them zombies in the game, but for the sake of so it's a zombie game. So there's a lot of gameplay elements that ramp up natural anxiety in the player as you're playing, right? And the other hallmark of that, I think it's safe to say Red Dead and The Last of Us share, is they're very emotional games, right? The stories that are told are top notch. They're well written. And so you have that part in Last of Us as well. And you meet Ellie, who's my MVP. You meet Ellie as a young girl. She's 14, I think, in the events of the first game. But you play as Joel initially. I'm sorry. Joel is the middle-aged male that you start with. And Joel has his own
Pascal.
Yeah, Pedro Pascal, there you go. And Joel has his own, he's the fulcrum of the story as well too. And he has his own history, and you play as him, and that's your initial sort of connection piece. And Ellie is initially seen as literally cargo is how they refer to her, how Joel refers to her. He's tasked with, it's the trope we've seen how many times now and across all storytelling mediums, where the old grumpy old man has to take the young protege across the wherever to deliver to whatever, and then they form a bond along the way. That's Last of Us. But Ellie is special because, especially when we talk about gameplay, Paul, which I appreciate you talking to, and how gameplay mechanics expound and expand on the narratives that are being told, right? Ellie is, the way that the game functions is, it's not like if you do something wrong, Ellie will die and then you have to restart to the checkpoint or anything. There's no dynamic like that. Ellie she follows you along, right? She's kind of along with you, but if she gets attacked, nothing really happens. There's no consequences. You don't physically have to protect her or anything. But at the same time, she's not really helping you. So she is really felt like, she's not really slowing you down, but it's just kind of she can feel like a nuisance. To Joel, she definitely does. But so the point is, like, there's and I will spoil this for The Last of Us Season 1 and Part 1. There's a moment that really sticks with me in The Last of Us Part 1 where Joel goes down. Joel is injured, and at this point, maybe 50, 55, 60% of the way through the game, a decent chunk where Joel is heavy-handedly carrying Ellie through these things. It's just them two as they journey across the country. Joel goes down. He's injured pretty significantly. And the game utilizes a mix of gameplay and cutscene where Joel is now incapacitated. He can't even fire a gun, and they have to fight their way through these rebels through I'm going to call out a mall, but I don't think they're actually in a mall. They're in a school, actually. They're at a university, on a campus, college campus. And Ellie, all of a sudden, carries you. You're playing as Joel, and Ellie, as a non-playable character, an NPC, carries you now through this segment. She's the one taking down baddies through cutscenes and through actual gameplay. And that moment is when you realize, like, oh my god, like, Ellie has been learning everything that you've been doing, you've taught her, and she is now able to defend herself at 14 years old. And it's a kid, and it's a very shocking, Last of Us, the game is outdated, unless you played the remastered version. But, like, at the time, it was really startling to see this 14-year-old girl attacking these rebels and winning, killing them with her bare hands and firing guns and whatnot. So you just kind of feel the way that she's progressed. And then there's that they get out of the university, the sequence ends, and then there's a fade, there's a cut to black. The next sequence of the game starts, and you play as Ellie for the first time. And I'll never forget, that was a moment where I was on the sticks. I was holding my controller, and I was like, oh, this is what I'm here for. Just kind of that feeling like Ellie has progressed and matured so much as a player to where she now has the skill set that you can utilize for yourself. Like, that's how far she's grown. The rest of the events of Last of Us will take place as they do if you've seen the show. But that's kind of the relationship that I have to Ellie, and I think a lot of people do. Is she's this young girl that you literally, she's 14, but you see her grow and mature through all this trauma, through the events of Last of Us, and then Last of Us 2 is Last of Us 2, and I'm not going to spoil or sort of expand on what that means, but it's another sort of furthering of this growing process, and you grow with this character, and the narrative's so well done, and I'll talk more about Last of Us 2 in of itself whenever we get to the gameplay elements, but Ellie, I think, is the first character in a nutshell that like I felt like I was growing with at the same time that she was, and I was growing through and getting used to the world and the world building. Like I was doing it in conjunction with her, and she seemed she formed that emotional sort of fulcrum for me, and I think for a lot of fans. So, Ellie Williams, my shout.
We're not going to be able to pick a winner, are we?
No.
Yeah, surely it's going to be one of the Red Dead guys. You guys?
No, no, I don't like John. Yeah. I don't like John at all.
Oh, that's interesting.
I like Arthur, but
well,
so just to get some interactivity here, I played Red Dead. I played Red Dead. I did not play Red Dead 2.
No, you didn't.
Oh, okay.
I played Red Dead 1. I did not play Red Dead 2.
Wow.
Red Dead 1, I can't remember how the releasing happened, but I think Red Dead came out before Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3 is the game of Xbox 360. That generation, like that's where I'm at. That's where my heart is. But Red Dead, whenever I played that, Paul, that moment in the barn, and you kick open the barn, and then the Deadeye kicks in, I will never. That was the first time where I was like, this is not. This video game is here to crush me. Like, this is not to have fun. And that's when it became clear to me, like, games are more than just childish things. That's
you know what?
Quote from Nier, which I'm going to talk about later.
What's crazy is that also, that's like an all-time, like, Rockstar in general moment, honestly, in terms of, like, because this is a company that's marked by, like, excellence in making games, to be clear.
Oh, yeah.
But
you got to think they're the pinnacle, right? Like they never get it wrong. It seems.
Easily. I don't think I've ever had a dud from them. What's funny though is at the time, because I remember being like, "Oh, that's crazy! Like that was very well done," and I was in like high school. Like I don't know anything, but at that time I was a huge LA Noire fan. That was like my favorite game.
What a nerd! That makes so much sense.
I loved Cole Phelps. I loved LA Noire. So I don't think that Red Dead 1 sank in because it was around the same time as LA Noire. And GTA 5 also came out around that time as well. So I was so sucked into both of those. I was huge into LA Noire.
GTA 5 had to have been a lot later.
I think it was on 360.
I think it was
2012?
2013.
2013,
yeah.
Okay.
I guess that's not too far.
What was LA Noire? Was that 12? 11?
2011 it says.
Okay. Yeah, so I remember I like got both of them because I got Red Dead 1 on sale. It was like $20 or something, so it had been out for a while. So LA Noire was like my jam, like at the same time. Probably not fair to Red Dead 1, and Red Dead 1's probably the better game to be clear. But I do love LA Noire. I think it's a very underrated Rockstar title, even if Cole Phelps is like a plank of wood.
And Noir is celebrated because I think they were the first. They had really like the new face
facial.
tech, right? And
huge.
At the time, it was crazy to look at the trailers and stuff.
Yeah,
I actually bought the remaster too, and it's.
I didn't even know they did
it.
I didn't know they remastered it.
They did. Cool. They did. I went and got it. I was like, let me relive this, and I was like, oh, I remember. I didn't remember the cases, but I'm like, oh, this is pretty formulaic. Like this is all right. But yeah. So shouts out to Rockstar. Shouts out to LA Noire. But also, yeah, I'm not a huge John guy. I don't know. I just never got into it very much. I don't know what it was. They kind of characterize him in the second one as like kind of dumb. Like everyone's like he's pretty stupid, and I think that really colored my experience of him as a character.
I mean, he is like literally kind of dumb. Like he's illiterate. Well, he doesn't read well. At least. Like, I mean, these are like genuinely uneducated folk in the late 1800s.
It's like the whole gang calls him stupid, like repeatedly. Like one of my favorite lines from the game, they're trying to build a barn, which is one of my favorite sections of the game. but he's talking to Uncle, who's like this old guy, like a really old, crazy drunk that like hangs out in the camp. And he's like, "We don't have time to build a barn. It's gonna take 6 months." And he's like, "You don't build a barn, you dumbass." He said, "What do you think is this, 1785? Like, you buy a barn, you idiot." And I was like, I remember like hearing that. I'm like, oh, everyone really thinks like this guy's just kind of not with it. I don't know what it was. Even his dialogue, I was like, Arthur to me is just so cool. Where it was like switching to John, I think I was thinking things against him.
Sure.
I honestly think kind of his, for me, John's lacking in the intelligence department does something for me because, you know, even though he's not the smartest, when he does figure things out, or he is good at the things that he's good at, you know.
He's also like the most genuine guy in the gang, for sure.
Yeah. So for me, you know, it was kind of always neat to see him, well, for the most part, like try to come out on top, right? It was like he put his head down and he would figure out what needs to be done to get it done. So
fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see any of us really budging.
No.
I will give a nod to Arthur though. I don't dislike Arthur like Eli dislikes John. I love Arthur too. But you know, it was just to have that connection to Red Dead 1. Even though like I learned not that I ever disliked Arthur, but like it was just everything in Red Dead 2 for me like tied back to Red Dead 1.
Well, we don't have to vote necessarily. I think
this is like
we did a pretty good job summing up the characters, and I think, you know, this might serve as a natural segue into just talking about video games as a storytelling medium in general. But Paul, whenever you were talking about how Red Dead, the first one, with John, and the moment in the barn when he's gunned down, and you fight back through the use of the Deadeye gameplay mechanic, like, I'm trying to think of other experiences in gaming where I had that no experience. That's what I jotted down whenever you were describing that, and it's a short list.
Yeah.
I mean, in the specific sense, like, naturally, like, there are games, just like in movies, right, where things happen to the protagonist that you don't want to happen, right? And gaming is different, of course, because you're controlling the actual character. But specifically, like, you are given, you have the felt sense that you're given the chance to fight your way out of this when you really don't. And that, I think, is the first time that I felt that. And the reason I shout out that experience is The Last of Us 2, the entire game of it really is along those similar lines, and I think the functionality is just slightly different because of the linearity, maybe, where the characters are, you know, you come to grow and to love a character. In the sense, I am talking about Ellie still. You grow to love this character through game 1, and in game 2, she is going through a tremendous amount of grief, and she is motivated and driven to do things, and she's in such her psyche is totally, like, it's just fractured, and you're witnessing her suffering, and she's driven to do these things that you really don't want her to do, but at the player you're forced to carry out, and you're forced to carry out through the entire 40 hours of the narrative that you play out, and it culminates at the very end whenever you're forced to have this confrontation that you really don't want to have, and you watch sort of Ellie disintegrate. And I think those moments, to me, are the moments in games, and every title that I'm about to mention whenever we really dive in here have these sort of shared experiences where you're forced to do things as the player that either you don't want to do or it's very painful for you to do, and it gives that emotional rise out of you. Those moments are just bar none. That's why I stick with this medium and I still play these games for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that is a good, you know, this is a good jumping off point to kind of just talk about the art and the storytelling of video games, which I think are separate things. You know, there are video games that I think are beautiful, and not just in like the photorealistic sense, but the just visually striking sense. But I just think that there's a storytelling aspect of video games that, in the nature of itself, is unable to be captured in any other medium. And I think a lot of that does stem from the, you know, inserting yourself into really like the protagonist's point of view. You know, this will be the first time we've said this on the pod, but I, on the record, am not a big film guy by any stretch of the imagination. I like movies. I watch movies. I'm actually more of a TV. Like I find myself enjoying more television shows from the storytelling aspect than I do film. And, you know, I grew up playing video games and did not grow up watching very many, like, saga, continuous, episodic TV shows or, you know, the movies that, I mean, I like Star Wars. Like, it was like, ooh, fun laser sword stuff. But I was never able to really fully insert myself into the protagonist in those mediums. And there's just something about that connection of you basically are becoming that person in a sense, or even if you're not becoming their person, like you are one-to-one responsible for some amount of the actions that they take, that just gives video games a whole different aspect. And at least for me, now that I didn't do very many notes for this episode, I'm just kind of letting things come to me naturally, and I'm thinking about games that really give a lot of the games that are coming to my mind in terms of games that I truly enjoy the storytelling aspect of are games that play with that motif. So things that are coming to my mind, the Mass Effect series, which I don't talk to you guys very much about as a series, but like that series I absolutely love too, as well as like the Walking Dead Telltale games, where there's just a large focus on the fact that the choices you make will have consequences in terms of the way the story playing out. Specifically the Telltale Walking Dead series. So the Walking Dead, so games take place in the Walking Dead universe, but the premise of the games are basically like a traditional old school kind of point and click adventure, but with the emphasis being that choices you make will result in characters remembering what you did. Like you see the memes where it's like X and X, you know, it pops up in the top right hand corner. It's like X and X will remember that. And it's funny and it's memed out a lot now, but you know, playing through those games, which I don't believe either of you have played that, right?
No, not the Telltale.
You know, the way that they do it is basically they give you, like, depending on the choice that you have to make, you have like a 5 to 10 second counter, like countdown to make your decision. So some of the stuff is like, you know, spoilers. Again, these games are a decade old now, so get on with it if you're going to get on with playing it. But, you know, a lot of them are like pretty generic. Like, you can only save one person. Who's it going to be? Like, are you going to go through the left door or the right door to save XYZ or XYZ? But, you know, and that's, you know, that does whatever for me. But like specifically two moments that I still remember very clearly from that game series. There's a portion of the game where you find refuge. You know, you're on the road. They don't currently have a home base at this point in the game, and you find refuge with this family in a farmhouse. And this family in the farmhouse, like, everything looks like it's going okay. Like, there's, you know, you're not getting any really big red flags or anything. Well, it turns out that they're cannibals. So they're people that are not zombies, like they're alive, but they cannibalize people. And you, as the main character, Lee Everett, discover that they are cannibals by like meandering your way upstairs, literally while everybody else in the game is sitting down to have dinner. And one of the options is you're coming down, and in kind of like the same Last of Us type situation, it's grumpy old man taking care of young female. And you see this girl who at this point you've created a relationship with. Her name is Clementine, and she's about to take a bite of dinner, which is human flesh. And the prompt comes up to like say something. So like you can either say nothing, you can like yell stop, you could like yell that's people, like. And I just remember the first time that came up, I was like, oh my god, like I don't know what to do. Like, I need her to not do this because you've formed a connection and you don't want to like traumatize her. And I think I yelled, I think I picked stop. Because, like, in your head, it's like, well, I don't necessarily want to say, like, that's people, because then I don't want the cannibals to all turn on us, and I don't want somebody to die, right? I don't want somebody to get miscellaneously killed because I'm, like, outing us that we know everything. But I also don't want Clementine to eat this. And I remember saying, like, stop, and then she takes a bite. Yeah. And it just gutted me to the fact that, oh my gosh, you know, this person that I'm supposed to be helping and protecting, I have let, you know, eat human flesh. And then a little bit further into that sequence, you fight one of the cannibals in like a barn, and you have essentially won the fight with that person, and you're holding a pitchfork over them, and you're given the option to kill the individual or let the individual go. And as far as you can tell, it's only you and that individual in the barn. And, you know, I'm angry because this individual I don't remember the character's name, created a situation where this person that I'm protecting literally eats human flesh. And I killed the individual. And in the top right-hand corner, it says, before you see the person, it says, Clementine will remember that. And Lee turns around, and Clementine has watched you murder this individual who was, like, otherwise helpless. And because of that, like, I had to, like, explain to her, like, because at this point, like, you're pretty much like a morally good person in the game. So, you know, talking about not killing people if they don't need to be killed, or, like, only doing in self-defense and stuff, where this was very much like a blind anger type of situation, and having to explain to her, like, why I chose to do what I did, and, like, reflecting on, like, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But it just kind of blew my mind how it's like, wow, like, I'm not setting a good example for this young girl right now.
Yeah. Eli, I want to tag you in, but I think, Paul, what I want to emphasize that we can come back into it as a group is, like, the different layers of mechanics and the different types of games and the different kinds of mechanics they have, right? Like, there is, you know, being that person was something that you said, and there's different ways that can look, right? Where you can play as an Arthur Morgan, or you can play as a Joel Miller or an Ellie Williams. Like, you take the identity of a person, you play through that character's actions, they make their own actions. The game, you play the narrative. There's also games where you actually make the decision, right? You actually make the decision for yourself, and then there's other born thoroughbred RPGs where you are yourself, and you kind of do what you will. So I just wanted to, like, kind of piece those things apart. And I'm saying this as a marker for the three of us that we can sort of dive into. But Eli, I want your initial sort of thoughts too.
Yeah, so I know, Josh, you and I have, like, gone back and forth on this before, and sort of as, like, an inverse to Paul, I am more of a film or, like, book guy as opposed to a video game guy in terms of what I think is the optimal medium for storytelling. I'm an English major, so maybe that's, like, inherent snobbery that I need to kill in myself. But what I would say is I think the interactive aspect of video games does make it, like, an interesting... It presents a new idea to storytelling that previously, for, I think, like, essentially millennia, has, like, not existed as a concept. And what I mean to say is that, like, I think I don't want to use the word constrict, but there are a lot of my favorite books or movies would not make good video games. Like, you would not want to play a Taxi Driver video game. Like, you would not want to play even movies that are more action-packed. Like, The Godfather, the video game. I had a Godfather video game. It was nothing like the film. Like, it was nothing. Yeah. It was not even remotely like the movie.
I'm thinking back to all the throwbacks now of, like, major releases that used to get video game equivalents, and they were just not.
And they were never like the movie, because it was like you have to do different things. And so, like, for example, I love Red Dead Redemption 2. I think that's great, and I think it tells stories very well. I think another one, even if just for a section, Battlefield 1, where you play the campaign, the first level, they plop you down it's a first-person shooter. It's like a general shooter game for people who don't know. And you go back and forth, and you're in a mission, and it seems like you're just going to play. And every single time, the guy you're playing as gets killed, and then it'll flash, and it'll give a person's actual name and, like, the years that they died. You see all these people are, like, 18 to 21.
I have chills. That game is...
Yeah.
Oh.
talking about feeling helpless, it's kind of sells the inevitability and the brutality that World War One really was. And I remember thinking like that is really, really cool and profound in a way that a lot of video games generally don't. But I also felt like in the level after, you kill like 60 German soldiers by yourself and you drive a tank and blow up an airplane factory or whatever. And like it kind of like undoes everything that you just did. And so I think there's like this tension I feel with video games and storytelling. And like single player games I think can escape this to some extent. So like a Red Dead or a Last of Us or something that's a little more toned down. But there is this constant tension I feel between like needing to make it kind of constantly engaging and like being able to tell like a somber and serious story. Like Red Dead Redemption 2, there are stories where there are missions where you're like, oh, we're building a house. I'm going to propose to this woman I'm in love with. If the whole game was that for 60 hours, no one would buy this game.
Sure.
Yes.
Well,
it's because you want to shoot people and ride horses and tie people up with lassos and all that. You know what I mean? Like there's this tension in it that I kind of struggle with personally.
Well, speaking of lassos, Ted Lasso.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
Well, no, it's just funny, like, because you mentioned that, because I've been watching Ted Lasso, and Josh has started to finish the third season, and like you're saying, you know, I don't want to play a Ted Lasso video game. You know, like no part of me is interested in I don't even know, telling puns and coaching a football team, like, but I think it is interesting, you know, kind of how just that interactability standpoint just changes everything about how it is to experience a video game, and the storytelling that comes through it.
There's I'm trying to think, Eli, the tension that you're talking about is, it may have been The Last of Us. I'm struggling to confirm it in my head, but like there's probably more games where like that criticism comes up, right? Like there's a narrative element, or there's a narrative sort of whatever. There's a conflicting moment that comes up where when it comes down to violence, right? And there's a conversation or a dilemma around violence. But meanwhile, the gameplay is all entirely built around violence. And so I think, you know, to hear, I appreciate you providing your experience to that, like what it feels like for you to do it, because whenever I encounter that criticism, I'm just like my brain automatically makes the separation. Like there are some games, and honestly, Last of Us is this for me. I didn't play Last of Us because I liked how it played. I played it for the story. Right. And so my mind is it kind of creates that separation. Like we're here for the story. The gameplay elements are just something extra. It's a little icing on the cake, but I hear that tension, and how, you know, just because of how you interact with stories yourself, like that is hard. It's a hard hump for you to get over.
I think that is interesting because I remember when the TV show was out, The Atlantic had a article about this where one of their cultural critics was like wrestling with video games being adapted to like screen, because like you said, the violence is, I think a lot of violence that happens in games, when you put it to like a different medium, it seems almost gratuitous. You're like, this is like a lot. And so I think he was kind of talking about that, and how it's like sometimes for the record, for anyone who's not aware, I think it was almost universally critically acclaimed, the adaptation. But I remember this one guy was really stuck in a similar space, and I forget the man's name, but the article was talking about, I think he used the word like narrative impoverishment in video games. That felt a bit strong. I didn't necessarily like that, but I do think that this tension is there, and like you said, like what you build the gameplay around, it frames how you can frame a story, I guess, for lack of a better word, which is it's interesting.
Yeah, and this is sort of a sub-conversation. I don't want to linger here too much longer. Talking about the narrative parts. But a lot of, you know what I personally struggle with, especially recently, I really struggle with engaging with video games that are built around anything but violence. Like, violence is such an integral part of gameplay. Like I'm glancing over here at my physical library, and the only games that don't have violence in them are sports games.
Right.
Which like in itself, I thought you were gonna say that, which was interesting. And it's like, I think even like the violence in video games, I feel like the crux of video games is competition, right? Like in that you have to, obviously there needs to be a goal that you're trying to reach. And I think the best way that often translates is either in violence, in that your competition is literally fighting for your life, or sports where it's like, this is objective A that you need to achieve in order to be victorious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because it does seem like, I remember when we were younger, and like PS2 was like the main, like, I've joked often, like, think of like rated T games. They used to be like pretty common. I literally don't know if they exist anymore. Like,
That's
it seems
a great
like
shout, actually.
rated E or rated M.
Yeah.
Because and that is just like, and I can't even think. I guess Star Wars was rated T, but like those sorts of games, and that's still violence for the record. But I remember thinking like,
Paul, while you're looking things up really quick, what is the Star Wars Survivor? What is the Fallen Order in those games? I wonder what they're rated. But continue.
oh yeah, that might be
Jamie, pull that up. That's an awful reference. I couldn't. I'm sorry. We don't endorse Joe Rogan on this.
I do like that as a phrase though, because I don't know any other like tech guys for podcasts.
That's strike
I mean?
two.
Oh man. Wait, for me personally?
Yes, for this podcast.
What was the first one?
I think uppity is what he's saying.
Well, uppity was that's okay. Whatever. Sorry, Eli. I cut you.
No, you're fine. I like that detour. But yeah, no, it's just because it is like, I'm thinking of like any context where like a regular rated E game that like isn't for children, because you could have like a kid's game like Minecraft or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's no goal, which is kind of what was so revolutionary about that game, I feel. And it was genuinely calm. I loved that game for like 2 weeks, and then I never played it again. But like I think it is interesting because, like Paul said, there has to be some sort of goal. And even in Minecraft, you're like, build a house, build a nice house. Don't let the skeletons and the creepers get you. And then I think there's like a dragon that they added at some point. You have to go kill it. But yeah, like games, you need to have some sort of goal or linear storyline. And usually violence is like a way that naturally translates, because video games are supposed to be like so fantastical. And like, you don't want to drive in your car to work in a video game. Like, you want to do something crazy. I want to dive out the window and shoot 2 handguns and like slow down time or something crazy. Like, it makes it, which I guess gets back to what I was trying to say earlier, was like, it's just like, it puts things in a box that are like, it's not necessarily bad, but it does put you in a certain sort of mindset where you need certain elements for it to work well.
And it's also interesting that like Grand Theft Auto role-playing has like become this its own genre in of itself.
True.
But again, that's not narrative driven. That's something very different. That's borderline like VR, right? But anyways,
I've seen like pacifist runs with like Fallout games, which I love the Fallout games or Skyrim games. But again, there's still violence in the games. You're just deliberately trying to avoid it. So I don't know if that really counts, you know? And like that in itself is like a challenge where it's like, how few people can you kill to beat this game? And it's like, that's already framing it in a very violent way, you know?
Star Wars Jedi Survivor is rated T. Interesting.
Okay, there we go.
Which probably is based upon like fantastical violence, right? Because it's a super violent game.
And they actually have it sounds like the sequel, right? So Survivor has detachable limbs, which the first did not, which is interesting. Yeah, but it's also Star Wars, so it makes sense to me that they wouldn't let that go M. I don't think.
You're cutting up like aliens and robots. They can kind of like tone it down a little bit, maybe.
I don't know. You're fighting stormtroopers too.
It's stormtroopers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which in the Force Unleashed there were detachable limbs for stormtroopers as well, and that was T.
You know, interestingly, I just pulled up an article, 10 best T-rated games of all time, and honestly, there's a lot of stuff on here that I feel like part of the difference too is just what can you get away with rating T for teen, right? So for those who don't know, the ESRB is the basically accrediting body that attributes age ratings to video games within the United States, and the majority, like the three major categories are E for everyone, T for teen, which is 13 and plus, and then M for mature, where at least to purchase the game you would have to be 18 years old, which has kind of fallen by the wayside in the age of digital downloads, right? That doesn't really make a difference anymore. But I'm just looking through like some of these the best T-rated games of all time. So Shadow of Colossus.
I knew that was going to be on there.
But I'm surprised, right? Like I feel like easily there's an argument that Shadow of Colossus should be rated M for mature. Other stuff I'm seeing, Horizon Forbidden West apparently was rated T for teen. Uncharted, T for teen.
Ah, yeah.
Batman Arkham City, T for teen.
Oh, that game was dark.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm pretty surprised, honestly, at some of
Arkham
these.
Knight's rated M. So.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
so there's
Arkham...
even a change. See, so like inner series changes, I think, are interesting too.
I also think as graphics get better, like even like pretty benign. Like Batman, you're just punching and hitting people. Like there's no blades or guns. But if you get it in higher def, like elbowing someone in the top of their head and like making their neck bend, they're like, oh, it's a bit much.
Well, I remember one of my favorite video games that is unlike those that we have discussed, where it's in terms of like the traditional storytelling model, where like video games give you the option to experience or make decisions that impact the story. Call of Duty World at War was one of my favorite games and campaigns to play through, and it doubles. So Call of Duty World at War is the first Call of Duty game. No, I'm sorry, not the first. So historically, Call of Duty had been set in World War One, World War Two, and then World at War was the first return to that kind of in HD graphics of the time, and it was just gruesome, like limbs, all sorts of
even
stuff.
the multiplayer, right?
Yeah.
The dogs.
And I remember the game opens with you being interrogated by a Japanese soldier, where like I think they slit the neck of one of your one of your comrades, and like he puts out a cigar on your forehead or something like that. But I just remember playing multiplayer on that game, my dad walking into the room, and somebody had gotten the kill streak of dogs, right? Really letting dogs onto the battlefield, and he walked in the room to me like just shooting animals, right? And he was like, "What are you doing? Like, I don't like this." And I'm like, "Oh, like it's, whatever." But like in retrospect, it's like, dang, like that was pretty hardcore stuff, Yeah.
To be ingesting as like a pre-adolescent, I think we were when World at War came out, and I remember it was like, this is the funnest thing in the world, but it was heavy. It was definitely heavy stuff.
Yeah. The thought that I have in my head right now is kind of going back to the narrative piece, but I don't want to go there.
I do personally want to go there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'd really like to highlight. Well, go ahead, Josh.
What do you want to highlight?
Well, I was going to say I'd like to highlight some specific instances of people who are not gamers that would not be able to experience some of these more finer detail storytelling aspects that are specific to video games. And the number one thing pointing out to me right now is Nier Automata.
So I want you to talk about Nier. The reason why I want you to talk about Nier is because Nier holds a very special place in my heart for a variety of reasons, and one of the prominent ones is that like it is a game that is built upon existentialist philosophy. That game is existentialism 100%, and it references specific theory, it references numerous specific works. Like the game is all about that, and so like that is my entirety of my 6-year education and university. So like I think you will have the most unbiased, sort of grounded talking about Nier if you're speaking to a non-gamer, and like why Nier is special.
Well, for me, I think just Nier Nier Automata is a third-person action RPG. So it has elements of like where you're just kind of a badass who's slicing up robots and fighting through waves of people. But the way that the story is structured is in that you play through the story, right? Yeah, it's separated into thirds, but you play through the story as character 1, and then you replay through the story, the same exact events as character 2, but because of the differences in perspective and the differences in abilities, like it creates this entirely different experience, and they kind of trickle you more and more of the holistic story. And then finally you play through part of the previous 2 stories that you'd played as character 3, but then you finally get to kind of like the official climax of the game.
Yeah.
And there's no way that you could make that story work in any other medium than video games, right?
Yeah.
Because you would be rewatching the same episode of the same TV show, but from like a slightly different perspective, which I guess is a thing that happens. You know, there are television shows where it's like, you know, episode whatever takes place from these 2 people doing their things, and then the next episode is the next 2 people doing their
I'm
things.
going to give a wild shout that builds upon a weird shout that builds upon this. It just came to my mind. One of the only movies I can think of that tried to do this was a movie called Vantage Point with Dennis Quaid that stars, and there's a few other names in it. One of the guys is from La Haine, actually. But it's a movie that's similar to this. The movie is about one event that takes place in like 2 to 3 hours, but the movie itself probably doesn't have over an hour 45 runtime. And it tells the story, oh my god, there might be like 4 or 5 different perspectives that it goes through for this 1 2 to 3 hour period. But anyways, Paul, that's like just the one movie that tried to do it. It was not very good. I liked it. I enjoyed it. It's different, but yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, it's just a very specific video game storytelling thing that can't be replicated easily.
Yes.
And even the precursor to that game,
Replicant.
Thank you. Nier Replicant, you basically play through the story twice in 2 different periods of time. And it's just, there's something about, you know, the mundanity of video games where you do get pleasure out of completing quests and fighting the bad guys that allows you to find more interest in doing essentially the same things over and over again that you wouldn't get if you were watching a TV show and it was the same thing from everybody's different perspective. And at least like in terms of maybe there's 3 episodes in a season of a TV show that it's like all these things are happening concurrently, but it's from the different viewpoint of each different character. But that's not the whole show, right? As opposed to like this is the whole video game, is you experiencing kind of these events, but from like slightly different vantage points.
And along the way, right? All along the way, you're learning, like, because a big part of the game and the existential philosophy that it's built on is sort of like meaning making, like the different perspectives and the experiences and how those shape or shatter those foundations of thinking, right? And so one of the things that's happening is you're building relationships through it, and then you're learning things from either the same playthrough or maybe the next playthrough that either shatters or builds upon it. And so there's just all these sorts of different webs that are being interacted upon by the experiences and the perspectives. Nier is special, and shout out to Yoko Taro, who's the creator of that series, and that dude is a master at video game narrative writing. But yeah.
I think
Eli, I wanted to tag you in if you had anything.
I didn't play it.
I know. Well, just in general.
I did watch a recap video that was suggested to me by Josh. This was years ago, but it has stuck with me. The structure is so unique to the point where, and I hope this isn't like a huge. Can I talk about like the credit thing that they do? I don't know.
Oh
if that's
my
like
god! Yes, please. I
forgot about that.
This is an aspect from the recap video that I thought was so fascinating. Is there's like a mini game in the end credits after you beat the game. Like that's
a part of the game in its entirety.
You
play that mini game throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's like you
Should we
track your
just
own
spoil
movements.
Nier? I feel like the
Yes.
context means a lot.
Yes.
Yeah,
And people aren't going to play this if they haven't already. I've recommended this to
feels
all
fair.
gamers.
That feels fair.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
I want you to explain it, Eli, but just to give the context, the way the game ends, the final ending that you get, like the actual in-game ending, is all the characters, the 3 playthroughs, playthrough A, B, and C, all those characters die in the end. And they die in different ways, but it's all in the purpose of you're fighting AI, essentially. You're fighting... Okay, so there's humans, Okay, really quickly, Eli, I do want you to explain this, I promise.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
The basic structure of Nier Automata, the history. Humans existed, right? Humans had to flee Earth because Earth was dying, and aliens invaded, right? Also, so it was humans versus aliens. Humans fled to the moon. They created androids. They sent them back down to Earth to fight the war against the aliens. The aliens utilized artificial intelligence, robots, to fight their war. So it was androids for the humans fighting against robots created by the aliens. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So in the end, all the characters learn that the humans have been dead for millennia. Millennia might be too big of a word. They've been dead for a long time, and so they're basically fighting for no cause. The androids are. And so have the aliens. The AI actually killed their master. They killed the aliens. And so in the end, all the characters die. You have a decision to make whether or not you preserve the data that humanity has created in the time that it existed. And I think that's the actual true ending is A2. Shouts to A2. She's one of my all-time favorite characters. She chooses to save humanity's data. Who's going to restore it and recollect it? No one really knows, but she saves it, and and they defeat the AI. So anyways, the game ends, everyone dies, and it has this really a very emotional sort of ending where they talk about just the narrative loop that you've embarked on with these characters, right? And that, to some, it might feel like their lives are meaningless. They've had the same events happen to them over and over and over again. It's an endless loop of suffering, but basically their experiences mean a lot. The relationships that you've created with them mean a lot, and the game fades and the credits roll.
And so the credits have this function mini game. I don't know what you want to call it. It almost resembles, if anyone's ever played Asteroids, like the old school Atari game, is what it reminded me of when I was watching it. And you're moving your figure around and you're shooting these things. And correct me if I'm explaining this wrong, but they collected the movements of like hundreds and thousands of other players of the game who have also completed the game, and they interpose that over where yours is, and everyone is collectively playing this game together, like in a recording.
Yeah.
It's I've never seen anything like it. It is fascinating, genuinely. And everyone plays it together, whereas to say, like, we have amassed a collective record similar to what was discussed in the game.
Oh, Paul, you're going to make me cry.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, my God. This is a tattoo for me, boys. I'm going to get this eventually, I think.
And so you get this with Paul sharing. And I remember, it's not super my scene. I'm not super into... the game is from Japan, so it has very anime stylings, I think would be fair to say.
Yeah.
And that's not really my scene, so I was like, I don't know if I'll ever play this, but I remember being struck by this specifically. I thought, that's really cool. And that is the thing I think that video games do that other mediums can't, because they're interactive, is that the connectivity and the idea of, like, we're forming a community here is unique.
Yes.
And that's why I think, like...
Community, yeah.
The thing it's given to is, like, almost like... I don't think it's an accident that esports is like even a thing, because similar to like team sports where it's like everyone's putting effort and time into a thing and it fosters a very specific kind of bond. Games are good at doing that as well. And so esports and I know people have varied and interesting opinions on the propriety and extent that should exist, but that's like another angle of this where it's like, that's what I do think games do well, is it fosters personal interaction, and it's people sharing in the same way that like a chess club or checkers club, like where people get together in the park and play that sort of stuff. It's similar to that, and I think that's a very cool aspect that games have, which isn't so much narrative, but that's just a feature I always really liked.
And can we talk about Nier just before we drop it?
Yeah.
Paul, were you going to say the same thing I was
Yeah,
going to say?
I'm sure I was, but go ahead.
Are you sure?
Probably.
I'm very emotional right now. You might want me to stop.
I,
It's just that this moment is so important because it actually directly relates to what we're talking about, right? Like before these, so you play as one of these singular. I'm looking at the image, the big enlarged image in the top right. You play as one of those singular things throughout the game, right? And initially, you are tasked in this sequence. You are tasked to fight the credits because you're actually. I think you're given the choice. You're like, are you angry that your characters have died that you spend 60 hours with? Maybe you should fight the creators. And you can fight the creators single-handedly. That's what it looks like if you fight on your own.
So just to give some more context, so this is you, the white aspect, and then you are trying to fight, like you are trying to avoid and shoot all of these dots, and you're also trying to destroy and shoot these names, right? Because as Josh was saying, it's like you're angry and you're trying to. This is like quite literally the most finalist boss in the game, and it starts out as you, and it is quite literally impossible. Like I think
you die
like not
numerous times,
like not quite literally. Like I'm sure somebody could do it by themselves, but for all intents and purposes, it is impossible. So the game asks you if you would like help. So in providing you with help, it gives you more people on your side to fight with and play with, and you're able to take on more of these.
Yes. And it beats you over the head with it. You die a good 5 times or so, and it asks you very direct. The game has a language to it. It's very direct. It's very blunt. And it's, one of the things that it asks you is like, do you think, now that you've died again, do you feel like games are silly little things? Do you want to quit your fight? And you can say yes or no. And if you press yes, you as a singularity, you spawn and you fight the credits again. And as you keep fighting, and so these guys join you, right? Other players join you, and the way that the game ends after you and the other players you beat the credits. The game hammers home its themes again, and you have the ultimate choice at that point. You're like, I forget the language that it uses, but it's they basically pose you the question of, it's the final message. You can keep your save data, and you can play through it yourself again, right? You can continue to play through Nier, and you can chapter select all the good stuff that New Game Pluses have. Or you delete your save data so that you can help someone else in their final fight whenever they fight the credits.
So this part here, it says Gulen X's data has been lost. So Gulen X decided to delete their own personal save data. So you've put in 40, 50, 60 hours into this game at this point to get to this final credit. And you delete your own true save data to add one additional marker to fight along your side, to fight the credits. And as they die, like, that's gone, right? So this person's data is gone. And the game says, like, will you offer up the time and devotion that you've put into this game to help somebody else get to the ending, or do you choose to maintain your save data so that you can, finish your side quests and do whatever it is that you want to do?
Play for yourself.
Yeah. And you cannot make that decision and then backtrack on it. So obviously if you choose yes, it deletes your save data and it adds you to that.
The game makes a show of it too. It'll go through all your settings. It'll show your file. It'll make you select and delete it. You have no choice to do otherwise. Yeah, it's a huge show.
But if you choose to maintain your save data so you can have it for afterwards, then you cannot go back and you can't double dip. You can't go back and delete it later to add to this group. So it's all or nothing essentially at that point. And it's just insane. And I remember just being mind blown the first time I got through it. And it's like, you have to make this decision of whether or not you will offer up everything you've put in to help somebody else get to the end, or do you maintain these hours and hours that you've put into it in order to, continue seeing this world that you've been able to experience.
I know Paul and I are really teeing off here, and I want to bring it back to include all three of us, but I want to acknowledge really quickly that whenever I played this, and I knew it wasn't going to be Eli's thing, though I talked to Eli's ear off about it. Paul ended up playing it, and I loved it so much that I didn't actually finish the full ending until Paul got there, and I don't know if you remember this, Paul. We were in a party and we did it together, and we muted ourselves, and then we came back at the end of it, and I just remember being like, I had no words. I was just in such shock, and by the like just all the emotions of going through that process, and I don't know. It was really unique that we kind of experienced that at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a magical game. Magical. Nier shouts.
I think I would like to talk about RDR2 for a little bit, and its storytelling methods. And I think Red Dead Redemption 2, which I again, even though John Marston's my favorite protagonist, I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is hands down the better of the two games. And it just delves into a sense of realism in living in like experiencing a real world that no other video game comes close to touching on. You have to feed yourself, you have to feed your horse. The thing that always gets me about that game is
You have to brush your horse.
You have to brush your horse. The hair pomade in that game.
Oh,
I remember that. I played enough to know that.
So like, you go to the general store and you buy hair pomade. So if you want your hair to be slicked back, you have to make sure that you have, and that was how I liked Arthur to look. I liked him to have long hair that was kind of like slicked back.
That the first game that had the shaving mechanism too,
shave,
where you're
that one. So
grew,
it was.
haircuts.
I think The Witcher 3 was the first to introduce
right,
it, but
good call.
But
Yep.
Red Dead 2 also had that in that it was like real time hair growth. So if you wanted to have a big beard and long hair, you had to wait for your character to grow that hair out. And if you wanted to slick back your hair, you had to have enough hair pomade in your inventory to slick it back, and eventually it would wear off and your hair would go back to, being ruffled or whatever, and you had to use another hair pomade. And it just like does things like that in such a different, like all across the board, to really like insert you into this world, in this environment.
Just to speak to that, you have to clean your guns too. You have to buy gun oil. You have to wipe it off.
And you actually lose damage.
Yeah, if you don't clean the guns, they fire off center. They don't damage as well. They look dirty. Like they literally will like look dirty. And your horse will get dusty and not run as well if you don't brush it and clean it. So you have to like run it through rivers and stuff. It is a level of specific, and not only that, you get reputations in certain regions based on how you act when you're in specific towns, and people will react accordingly. It is like to Paul's point, just a level and depth of realism and world building that I think is like exceedingly rare. There are newspapers you can like buy and read about like local events that you partake in. It really is, and a bunch of side characters that have nothing to do with main storylines that are just super in-depth written and like fully realized as characters. It's just fascinating.
And I know just hearing you guys talk about the world building, right? Like I think the last game that I played like that is Cyberpunk for me. That's the last world that I really just felt sucked into. And I don't want to go on and monopolize about Cyberpunk, but I think what's interesting to me is how differently we respond to these to the particular worlds. Like I think I'm on the record, I'm not a Western fan. I'm not into cowboy culture. So that's one of the reasons that I don't feel drawn to Red Dead. But so I guess the question within this is like, when a game comes out, right, or when there's a series on your radar, like how much do you guys feel like you have to have a connection to what the protagonist looks like and how the protagonist is advertised for you to be able to jump in? Because to me, that like, I guess I'm asking that from a position of bias. Like that means a lot to me.
I think I do have to like it. So like for reference, well, actually, I guess I should say that. So Red Dead Redemption 1 is actually what got me into like westerns and cowboy movies as like a concept.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So then I got into it. I'm like, oh, this is pretty fun. And then I started watching the movies and like, okay, this is cool. I do like this. So that's kind of a unique thing. But so by the time Red Dead 2 came out, I was like, oh, I like cowboys. Yeah, I'll buy this.
Yeah.
Whereas other games I like Fallout, I like post-apocalyptic stuff. That's like kind of interesting to me. Skyrim was kind of a hard sell at first because I was like, I'm not a huge fantasy fan. I was like, yeah,
Oh, that's right.
dragons, wizards, it's fine. But then I bought Skyrim and I'm like, okay, this is fun. But you also get to like it's a straight RPG. You build the character and you get to do it. Whereas certain games, if they're like like games from in certain subgenres, like adventure games, like the Uncharted series, I was like, I don't care about this.
Yeah.
Metal Gear Solid, I always like because it's like, oh, it's like spies, it's army stuff, that's cool. But yeah, some games, if I'm not really feeling the setting, like Cyberpunk didn't really draw me in at all, or like Bioshock's another one where like people loved it, and I'm like, steampunk's not like my scene. I don't really care about it, so like I was like, I'm good. I don't need to buy that, even though people really liked it. Far Cry, on the other hand, Far Cry 5 and Far Cry 2, they were in settings I thought were really interesting, and the other ones I was like, nah, I can take it or leave it.
Oh man, it's crazy to me that we're what hour 45
Oh, yeah.
in. I don't know what it actually is, and Far Cry just now came
true.
up. But anyways,
For me, it's interesting. It's like super different. I don't care about the setting, but Josh, you had said earlier about you did not play The Last of Us for the gameplay, right? Even though a lot of people like by the average gamer standards, The Last of Us is a fun game to play. For me, if I don't like the gameplay, I cannot suffer through the story, which is awful because there's a lot of games, and I think there's, gosh, we could talk about this for hours, but like the whole aspect of let's plays and watching people play video games and watching somebody play a game that maybe you cannot or do not want to play yourself, but getting entertainment from seeing the story or seeing what they do or how they interact in that world. Even a game that you may have played yourself and seeing how this person does things differently than you do. But for me, like, I cannot suffer through a game if I do not enjoy the gameplay, even if the story is something that I think I would really enjoy, which I think is the one downfall of video games as a storytelling medium.
yes,
and this is coming from the three of us who are arguably gamers, right? Versus somebody who does not want to play video games or does not enjoy video games at all, where they miss out on all of these various storytelling aspects because it is a medium which is more like undoubtedly more difficult to get into than books, TVs, film. And it's just so interesting to me because like, I tried to play The Last of Us, and that darn game is way too scary for me. I don't like it. It's terrifying. And that's a whole other thing that I could talk about, where I like horror. Like, horror is a genre that I enjoy, and I do not and cannot and will not play horror video games because there's something for me about being able to disconnect from things that I'm seeing on screen happening to other people versus being placed into that and thinking like, never like I myself are in real life danger, but just the blood rush that you get from seeing this person that you're supposed to be controlling being in immediate danger. Like, I cannot withstand that. And I just think because of that, though, like, and because of the way video games are structured, it creates such a different atmosphere and ability to do storytelling and create all these different environments.
and it demands a lot more time, right? Like, you can be turned off by the gameplay and just the amount of time that's dedicated. Like, I'm just thinking, for me personally, like, God of War is a story that I have heard is amazing. I can't do the gameplay, and it's a barrier for me, and it really, really sucks. I'm angry about it.
Same with, like, for me.
Do you have something, Eli?
Oh, I was saying, speaking of like the time entry, like I think of like Assassin's Creed. Like when I first got into that, I played the first 5 actually. I love them. Think they're great. They're super fun to play, but then they get to such a point where the lore is so like expansive, where you're like, I can't keep up with this. I think they were doing like a game a year for like 15 years, like literally. And they were pirates. They were in France. They were in Egypt. They were in, I think, India and China for one of them.
England, in it?
England, French Revolution. And I was like, I can't keep up. Like, I can't play one of these games every year. And so, like, fatigue is another real, like, where someone's like, oh, I think Assassin's Creed's like really fun and says interesting things. I don't think the games are that deep, but they're fun and they're like cool story. But if you told people like, yeah, you got to spend $600 and spend 300 hours to play through all these games, they're gonna be like, no, I'm good, I'm fine.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
the other series that comes to mind in regards to that is Kingdom Hearts.
Oh,
Kingdom
yeah,
Hearts is one of my
true.
favorite video game series. I've played the first one and the second one, and I've not played the third one because it is just so much. And that series is notorious for being like, okay, so you play Kingdom Hearts 1 on the PlayStation 2, but then you have to play Kingdom Hearts Unchained, which is a Game Boy Advance 2D scroller game.
Wow.
And then the one after that is and then you play Kingdom Hearts 2 on the PS2, and then there's like 6 different games. 2 are on the 3DS.
2.5,
Yeah, like,
2.43.
and like 2 are on the 3DS, one's on the PSP, one's a like Japanese PlayStation exclusive, and then you can play Kingdom Hearts 3, and it's just nuts. It's just insane to. In each of those games has layers and layers and layers on lore and content and everything, and Mickey Mouse is there, and what the heck's going on?
I've never deciphered. I've always observed people really liking those games. I've never figured it out. I still don't know how Disney is even implicated. Like, I genuinely don't understand them.
But it's just nuts. It's like, it's not just like, oh, like I watched TV show whatever, and now I'm gonna watch the spin-off of it because I like this character. It's like, no, it's like you are putting in 40 to 100 hours to beat this game so you can understand what's going on in the next game that you actually want to play, which is absolutely, again, just another barrier to the medium as a whole.
You remember the books that they used to sell, like at the game store? You would get the guides, and they would like
The
have
Prima
extra
guides.
information. Yeah, and I remember having like all the. He's got. I think Josh has one on the shelf. I remember like vividly like doing that. I used to get Game Informer magazine from GameStop. I used to. Yep, there you go. Like,
Look how thick this thing
it's like
is.
a
This
real
is
book.
Cyberpunk.
It's a genuine tome.
It's a real book. Yeah. Locations, weapons, character. Yeah, these things are nuts.
All these
Josh
bad
pulled it
boys.
up.
I just like.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Oh, shouts to Prototype. Oh my goodness.
Oh, I forgot about that game.
Dragon Age, The Prince of Persia.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
you know, this was pre accessible internet times,
Yeah.
right? So
I was
like,
down for Pokemon. Yeah.
in order to Spider-Man 3, the video game. No, was
Conan?
it Spider-Man 2 was the first one that let you walk around on the streets.
On the ground.
Yeah. I just oh my god.
Fable.
Oh,
I haven't
I'm
heard
gonna-
that in a
Fable's
while.
a gem.
I never played it, but I just remember it being a thing. Fable.
it just
Classic.
blows my mind that this is a medium of storytelling that is just automatically rejected by such a large group of people.
It's and I'm thinking about the barriers for that too, because like, you know what's crazy is like I remember playing Far Cry 3, which Far Cry 3 I'll make this very brief. Far Cry 3 holds a special place in my heart because did you guys both play Far Cry 3?
I didn't play it.
I
Paul
played
did.
Beat.
Far Cry 3 is sort of an allegory, I think I'm using that term correctly, to Alice in Wonderland. Like they're parallels.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I was just like, oh my, like how far the medium can reach. And I was so passionate about how it went. I remember, I don't know what year it came out. It may have been like 15 or 16. I remember talking my parents' ear off. I was like, no, you need to listen to Voss. Listen to Voss's monologues. How cool of a character is this? And he's actually the Hatter. I don't actually know if that's his parallel, but just the depth of the stories that are told here. And like, it's just, I don't know. At the end of the day, I guess that's just how it is. It's a medium that some people are going to be into and others aren't. But
And that makes me again go back to like RDR2, where I'm. It's been a minute since I played through, but just thinking about things where it's like, if your character is injured because of a story consequence, then you have less health available to you in the game. Or like, if you've been stranded somewhere and you have been unable to attain food, you will have less stamina. And the incorporation of like storytelling aspects in with the video game aspects is something that is just so interesting to me as a medium, and how like different storytelling aspects limit what you're able to do. Another game that comes to mind is Halo Reach. The story in Halo Reach, and so Halo Reach being an offshoot of the Halo series, where basically the last of these group of soldiers all die off one by one, and the final mission is you just fight until you are killed. And it's not scripted, like you're not scripted to die, but it is your last stand, and you will just the level does not end. You just keep going until you eventually die, because that is the end of your character. And like just how to utilize aspects of that to really drive home like the hopelessness of the entire situation is just something that continues to blow my mind.
That's a great dynamic, I think, in games. The one where I don't know. I think there's probably an easier way to sum this up, but like, where you're put in a situation where you are supposed to die, but the game doesn't force you to die like John Marston is forced to die. You're forced to die because you have to lose. You have to eventually have to give out. I have to shout out really quickly Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, because it's all about that, and that whole game is a sort of metaphor about fighting inner demons and whatnot, and the game literally ends where you are fighting just a non-stop horde. And if you get really good at the combat, it's, you're able to keep up. It's difficult. You're able to do it. You can keep fighting. And there are voices. Senua, the main protagonist, suffers from psychosis. And the voices are telling her, like, you just need to let go. You just need to give up. You can't keep suffering like this. And sure enough, like, you just kind of think that they're messing with you at first, that it's not really real. And so, of course, you're going to keep fighting because it's a video game, right? You keep doing the thing. And then eventually I did. I gave in, and I was like, all right, I'm just gonna stop. And that's when the game ends, and it's a really good dynamic. So I didn't know that Halo Reach had that. That's cool. How much longer can you guys go? Because I have one question that it could be the last conversation that we have before we do our shouts for best games in the last whatever years.
Sure.
But
yeah, I'm good for one more.
Yeah.
Let it rip.
I guess, because I'm thinking about the barriers that you've been talking about, Paul, and how time being one of them, right? Time that you have available to put in a lot of these games, right? 30 to 40 hours nowadays is on the shorter end. I feel like that's really rare that games have a 30 to 40 hour gameplay, 30 to 40 hour campaign. And to me, like, I hear that and I'm like, wow, that's a lot. I might skip out on that. So I guess the question is, like, how has your engagement with single player video games changed as you've entered adulthood and, first entry into our respective fields and whatnot?
I mean, I 100% have noticed it. I play a lot more sports games. I play a lot more multiplayer games where I'm able to sit down and there is a definitive, even if I play multiple matches, there is a definitive end to something, right? Versus like these 2-hour-long quests where maybe I get halfway through and then I tap out and then I come back. I don't remember what's going on. I don't remember the context of what's going on before. It's like these games where I can easily sit down, bang out a few matches or a few rounds. Or I still, to this day, I still play a lot of 2K's golf game. Golf simulator game, because it's just easy for me to sit down and it's fun and I enjoy it. But like, it's like, okay, I'll play 18 holes. It'll take me like 30 minutes to get through that round, and then I can play again or I can be done. Versus like, I currently have downloaded Kingdom Hearts Remastered, Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 2 on my PlayStation, and I scroll by it and it plays the opening tune and it hits me in the heart, and then I think to myself, I don't want to dive into this right now. This is too much.
I'm in pretty much the exact same boat. I mean, I have not played a round of a game in like maybe a month at this point. Like,
nice.
Yeah, and part of me is like, yeah, like Paul said, like, play a sports game, like log on, do a game of Madden, do a game of 2K, or like Call of Duty is like perfect because it's like these rounds are like 7 minutes. I could just like shut my brain off and just play, and then like I have a goal, I can try to play well, it's fine. And then, but even that, I've hit a point where it does feel like there could be more. I don't want to use the word productive because that sounds very pejorative, but it could, like, in the same sense, like I
Yeah.
could read a book, I could watch a movie, I could do other things, and I think
Yeah.
part of that, I don't want to personally dedicate the amount of time it takes to get into a single player game because, like you said, these things are averaging
Yes.
like 60, 80 hours these days, and I just
Yeah.
don't have the time to consistently keep up with it. I don't want to commit the
Yeah.
time, I should say. So that's where I'm at
Yeah.
with it.
I'm in the same boat as you guys. I think again the last game that I got into and like really dove into was Cyberpunk, and I
Hmm.
think that was just a special spiritual aligning for me.
Yeah.
It was like there's no way I'm not gonna play this game
Hmm.
because of the leanings that it had and
Right,
whatnot.
right, right.
But aside from that, I'm in the same boat as you. I play mostly sports games, quick one-off multiplayer games with quick rounds. Um,
And that's fun.
there
That's fun to do, you know?
it is fun, and I think the other point, the other part of it for me is, and Paul, I'm curious how you feel about this too, and Eli, yeah, how there's the physical time, right, that you're looking at, like, oh, this is a 30 to 40 hour playthrough. Like for me, damn, that's a lot nowadays. But the other part of it is like how much is my brain going to have to work? Because
Hmm.
it's a lot different if I'm sitting there and looking at something. I don't read a lot of fiction, but it's even different from what it feels like to read fiction. Like, not only does my brain have to think about the gameplay, learn the game, I also have to put mental energy into making my character better in some
Hmm.
RPGs. Like, I have to look for certain gear, what kind of playstyle do I want to have, right? Like, there's a lot more mental energy than it's just like, you can't, for me, I can't passively play the game
Exactly.
to experience a story. It's a very active activity that it's very difficult for me to have consistent energy for.
Yeah. So like the story can't stall in a book or a movie because like you're just gonna keep reading or watching it. If you don't beat the level in a game, like you can't progress in the story. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's exactly no. That's a good point.
I will say kind of an interesting thing I've noticed over the last 3 to 4 years is many games, especially story-driven games now, do have like their difficulty, and like it'll have like normal difficulty, hard difficulty, but they usually have some, or a lot of them now have some sort of like casual difficulty, or they'll call it like story difficulty, where it's like
Yeah.
you're not gonna get stuck on anything, but like here's what you can do if you're gonna worried about getting stuck somewhere, and like you can just bang through the story. And it's interesting for me because like on paper I really like the sound of that, but at the same time it's like I've never opted to do that for a game because
I was
something,
gonna say I've never played it
yeah,
either.
no, because there's like something about like just running through the motions like doesn't interest me. Like there's something about the struggle of playing and beating the game copped with the struggle of the character that they're going through or whatever is going on.
Yes.
Like I think Ghost of Tsushima, which we haven't talked about yet. Like there's a million games we could talk about, but like I think Ghost of Tsushima has like a story mode, and I don't think like that I would, or like a story mode difficulty like easy setting where like I don't think that I would have gotten the same thing out of it had I just played through that versus just playing through the game itself.
And just really quickly, because we've been talking about Nier so much, and we really did a deep dive on Nier. Nier, I think, if you put it on the story setting, whatever they call it, it has an auto evade system. So, like, you don't get hit; it just dodges for you, perfect timing dodge all the time. And for a game that's all about repetitive suffering and what that means, like, are you really suffering with the character if you're just dodging everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. That's a good shout.
How can we wrap this up?
Well, I think we could just jump straight to just pointing out our top threes, but I think general perspectives on what games are and what they do, I think I'm still in a place where it's like I think the narratives are, like I said earlier, kind of boxed in a very specific way, which is like not necessarily a negative, but it does place limits on what I think the horizons of what a game can do is. And I also think, like we said, with the time capacity, it's like they're available to a very specific subset of people. And so when I think about like what games can do, they can be very intimate, they can be very personal, they can be very driven, but like in very specific contexts. And I guess that's why I like I say yes, but with like an asterisk. Like these are good. This is cool, but with an asterisk. So I guess that's where I'm at with it as like a general perspective on it, and like
Yeah.
happy to hear your guys' general outlooks on this before we go to our top threes.
Yeah. I'm at a mix. I honestly think that I'm at a place now where I feel myself like mentally moving away from video
Mm-hmm.
games, which I never thought that
Yeah.
I'd be coming to that place, but just with the way that my mind works and like how active I feel like I have to be to play a game, I would much rather engage with stories in different mediums. Which really pains me to say. This is truly is something really recent in the last few weeks. So I think I'm in a place of gratitude, really. I'm happy I've played. I probably
Mm-hmm.
have 5 or 6 really like core gems that have really shaped, how I see myself, how I see stories and interact with stories. And I'm proud that I've experienced those. But the rest, I think I'm at a place where I can pass on gaming,
Mm.
on different stories now through gaming.
Yeah, I mean, out of the three of us, I'm probably still the most dedicated gamer. And even myself, like, there's stuff that, like, it's just too much. It's just too much to get into it. And it's something that I don't want to, it's almost like the, what's that called? Like the sunken time fallacy. Where it's like, I don't want to, if I don't see myself actually getting through and beating this, I'm not even going to start it. I don't even give something the chance to like kind of capture me unless I like really see myself getting through it top to bottom. And that has, I've missed out on a lot of stuff that I'm sure I would enjoy, but like, it's just, in the grand scale of things, it's not where I want to be placing the time that I have.
That's real.
That being said,
That's sad.
if you had to play 3 video games,
Yes.
what 3 video games would they be?
I'm going to start with Rise, Son of Rome. I think it's an underrated.
Oh wow.
No, that was a joke. But I will say, I actually did really like that game. It's a fun game. It's repetitive, but it is fun.
Wasn't that the exclusive release for Xbox
It was
One,
like the launch
right?
title
The
for
launch?
Xbox One.
Yeah.
I played it like
Wow.
7 years after it came out because it was free on Game Pass. But
Yeah, there you go.
no, I'll let you guys go first, and then I'll try to formulate 3 real answers.
Man, you had me.
I really did.
I mean, I think Red Dead Redemption 2, number 1, in terms of storytelling, gameplay, innovation, everything just has to be up there for me. I think probably Borderlands
Ooh.
2.
Oh, we didn't even talk about Borderlands.
Borderlands 2. Storytelling, I mean, it's childish. It's gross, crude humor. It's like the South Park of gaming, but it's coupled with a very, very enticing, rewarding, fun gameplay loop that just like draws you back in. Has like a third game. I'd probably have to shout out Nier just in terms of storytelling and gameplay. Like, I think it's a super fun game, rewarding game to play, rewarding gameplay loop, and then just the storytelling aspects that you go through just kind of create the full perfect circle for me.
Yeah. This really sucks. I wish that, part of me was like trying to passively push, like, let's just do last 5 years. That way it makes it easier. It'd make it easier for me.
Yeah.
To do all time, it really, really sucks because it's just so tough. I'm going to go in no particular order, but I'm going to start with Far Cry 3, I think. Far Cry 3 was, there were a lot of games that shaped, like, the Kingdom Hearts of the world, other PS2 gems. Tekken's a little bit different, but Tekken also shaped. Final Fantasy I'd even throw in there, but, like, Far Cry 3 was the first game that, like, I was, like, in the story. I wasn't there to have fun. I was playing it for the story, and I loved Far Cry 3 and Voss, and shout out to Michael Mando, who... that performance is incredible. Far Cry 3. Nier, of course. Nier Automata. There's no questions asked about that. And I think Last of Us 2. The series all together, or specifically Last of Us 2, whichever. That would probably be my three.
I would say Red Dead Redemption 2 is at the top of the list. I mean, it's just phenomenal. GTA 5 probably, which is like kind of cliche because it's been remade like 15 times at this point, but it is a genuinely really good game. I think like people because Grand Theft Auto has a reputation of being like, oh, you drive over pedestrians in your car and you like shoot at crowds, and like that's part of the appeal of the game. It sounds horrible to say, but it is. Is to just cause wanted chaos. But the actual story and the characters they let you play as, like the end missions, because they make you do one of three choices that like forever alter what the game looks like. And all three of them are genuinely really, really impactful. So I really always appreciated that. So I would say Grand Theft Auto 5 because it is the most polished of the Grand Theft Auto games. And then I got to put a Fallout game in there because it's like my favorite game series. I'd probably say 4. It looks the best. It plays the best out of all of them. I think all the stories are great. I actually don't think 4 has the strongest story of the bunch, but I do think the gameplay more than makes up for it. And the companions you can get in Fallout 4 are like my favorite crew that you can roll with. Fallout 4, which is also great.
Is that the one that has the Pit DLC,
That's
or is that
Fallout 3, which is a great game. I love Fallout 3. I love Fallout New Vegas as well. I mean, I think all of them are great. I even bought, as you both know, Fallout 76, which I think was overly hated, personally, even though I don't think they fully knew what they wanted to do with it either. I had a decent enough time with it. And as I said to both of you, I bought it for $10, and I got at least $10 worth of fun out of it.
there you go.
So yeah, but also shout out to sports games like we already mentioned.
Yeah.
Madden has fallen off recently, but you know, shout out
They all have.
NCAA 14 though, all time great game. Forza, I love the Forza games. They were always like crisp and clean in a way that was like very calming. You play like the cool techno music when you drive in the Alps or whatever with like a luxury car. I just love Forza games, so shout out to them as well.
Dang. There was a whole other segment we probably could have done with VR, with Paul leading the way,
yeah,
and now
true.
when you ended on that, oh man, endless, go on forever.
I feel sad right now.
Yeah.
Getting old.
Yeah.
Feels like you do feel your age when you talk about gaming, I feel, because it is.
What kind of episode was this?
It was
Should we just quit now?
Dark.
What are we
It
doing?
was kind of dark. It ran long. It's like been sad at multiple points. I don't know. It's like late night vibes are kind of off.
Yeah.
No, but it is true. I think I try not to use. I feel like calling games juvenile is like overdone by like a lot of people, but it is like you do kind of feel your age when you talk about them. I guess is the better way to frame that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's real. No, I feel you. I feel you there. But
it's certainly nothing that I think. It's not a hobby that I think I'll ever regret, though.
True. That's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
There's always avenues to jump back in, right? You can keep those little gems. That's all you
Call
need.
of Duty every year. Get back in.
There you go. There you go.
Well, I believe that that's been the water cooler.
That has episode 2 in the books. Very nice. So we'll be back eventually. I don't want to put a hard timetable on when we'll return, but we'll be back. Same segments, new main segment next time, but we'll be looking forward to it. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Follow us on Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube, which is where you'll likely be seeing us, and we'll get the Twitch thing up and running so we can get some live engagement. That would be cool.
Yeah.
And we'll for sure be able to do that.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. See you guys next time.